Hi Euro 199 students, hi everyone. My name is Alexandra Pfefferle and I'm the director of the Illinois and Vienna programs. Today I have the great pleasure to introduce you to Smart City Wien project manager Eva Pangerl. But before we start, I would like to tell you a little bit of where we are right now. My colleague Karl and I went today from our office at the University of Economics and Business straight to the city center of Vienna to meet Eva Pangerl here in her office at the MA18, a municipal agency, which is located right next to the beautiful building of the City Hall. And right now we are sitting in the office lounge in front of 4 striking pictures. And on these pictures, we can see landmarks, Viennese landmarks of city planning. And I would like to ask Eva, before we start and before you introduce yourself, to tell us a little bit about these pictures. What are we seeing here?
So first of all, hello students from Illinois. I'm happy to share some of my experiences working here in the city of Vienna, for the city of Vienna. And as you just said, we're sitting in front of 4 great pictures of city development areas in the city of Vienna. Introduce you to one of them. For instance, this is a city development area called Seestadt Aspern. It's located in the north of Vienna, and it's very often linked with the idea of smart city. And as you can see, for instance, there are some qualities that are linked within smart city already can be seen in the picture, the green areas, for instance. And at the same time, I think it also shows where smart city can still go. If you just look at the roofs, for instance, there's still a lot of potential for more solar panels, for instance. So I think
I can see solar panels here.
Yeah, great to see where we're standing right now and where we still need to go.
Thank you very much for this input before we started. And now I would like to ask you to introduce yourself a little to us.
Sure. So, as I said, my name is Eva Pangerl. I studied climate change here in Vienna, but also at the University of Copenhagen. I focused on natural science aspects, also on the consequences of climate change, and also on climate protection and strategies, how to prevent climate change from happening. During my studies, I had the great opportunity to study abroad, but also to, for instance, visit the UN conference on climate change 2013. That was very interesting to see also how international negotiations in that area take place, how they work, what the challenges are. And then when doing my master thesis, it was actually the first time that I focused on cities, because my general studies was focusing more on the international and European context. But I was really very happy and very enthusiastic about the Copenhagen climate plan. And while I was studying in Copenhagen, I was really feeling that all political parties were really in line when it comes down to protecting nature, protecting and climate protection, something that is not the case everywhere in the world. And it was very fascinating to see how the political context was in Copenhagen. And my ambition was to look at the Copenhagen climate plan and to analyze it, compare it with Vienna's plans regarding smart cities, also climate change and so on, and to come back to my city with a lot of good ideas and recommendations for the city. And somehow within a few interviews linked to my master thesis, I was then also asked to send my CVs and so on. And that's how I started actually applying for jobs at the city of Vienna. I have been working here for the past 5 years. Mainly dealing with the smart city strategy and with the smart city initiative. That means taking care of monitoring, evaluating the strategy, developing it further, taking on new topics, doing projects on the ground or advising projects on the ground, disseminating our strategy, and so on.
The students and we have read the very impressive Smart City Wien framework strategy paper, 160 pages of in-depth knowledge and expertise. And I mean, the framework is impressive, right? It is based on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, set out in the UN 2030 agenda. And it comprises 12 thematic fields: energy supply, mobility and transport, buildings, digitalization, economy and employment, water and waste management, environment, healthcare, social inclusion, education, science and research, and participation. So this is a lot. How would you describe Smart City Wien in a nutshell?
Yeah, you're right. It comprises a lot of different topics. I think the way I always try to explain it in a nutshell is Smart City Wien is the term for a social and sustainable city. I think, in the city of Vienna, this really brief description describes it the best. Yeah.
And in times of COVID-19, would you also say that a social and sustainable city is a resilient city? Is the term resilience also something that comes up in your work?
Yes, it does come up. Yes, yes. I think the term smart city also comprises this idea of resilience. A city nowadays also needs to be resilient to be able to tackle all the things that are coming around. One day it's COVID-19, the next day we have all the consequences of climate change. But it also needs at the same time to take care of social aspects of the society to be able to fulfill the targets, but also to prevent that this aspect is neglected.
Another challenge, from my point of view as an interested citizen, when I look at the list of contributors, when I look at the list of working groups, and then I see hundreds and hundreds of names of experts, of agencies, of institutes, how does communication work among Smart City Wien players? How do you do that?
I would actually like to start with just outlining once again what you just said, because it is really a great thing to have a strategy that is adopted by a city council, but that has been established and written and discussed with so many different departments also within a city. It is not very not a given that so many different departments actually work together towards one idea. It's a great thing, and I think from looking at the historic background of cities were often built in clusters and thematic fields that were not linked together. But nowadays, with the new challenges we have ahead, whether it's digitalization, whether it's climate change, and so on and so forth, we really need this interdisciplinary approach, and we really need to collaborate and work together to actually find new solutions for the problems we have, for the challenges we have. So I think this is really something that worked out very, very well within the strategy, and it's something that we also want to follow on in the future. About the communication in general, we have our Smart City web page that everybody has access to, and for instance, when we updated the framework strategy and established the framework strategy, we had regular workshops with many different people from many different departments, but we were also looking at we were also trying to really organize once a month, more or less, one great workshop where everybody is just welcomed and where everybody is joins and where everybody gets together to also like foster this.
So how
exchange.
many people do come together at such a workshop?
So I think it's also listed at the end of the strategy. There are about 150 people that actually worked together to create that strategy.
Wow.
Yes.
And it's a monthly meeting.
Back then, in 2018, when we were working on updating our strategy, yes, it was more or less a monthly meeting. Sometimes it was every second month. That really depends. But to just give you an idea, we can say it was once a month.
And back then, when it was not a problem that
Exactly.
150 people would meet in one room or one hall
Of course.
or whatnot.
Of course.
Okay, then. And what about now? how does communication work these days? How often do all relevant working group leaders meet virtually or in person?
So for instance, we established the city. The city was the strategy. The strategy was adopted in 2019 by the city council, and now we have various things to work on. One of them is actually we started this year with establishing a roadmap, especially for 3 selected topics of the strategy on how to really get to the 2050 targets.
Okay.
I mean, there are things we know, but it's just like a process of discussing it, developing it further. The whole climate policy in general, but also like our work here in the city is dynamic, so it changes, so we always have to keep updated with that. And so what we do right now is we had, during the COVID times and the COVID shutdown, we had a lot of online meetings and online workshops that worked actually rather well. Or we have smaller meetings where we just sit together, a few of us. Exactly. Right. But we also selected a few topics only, so we're not working, like we will eventually, but like we now do it step by step, and we will work only with a few topics of the Smart City strategy at the moment, and that means that we will also have another different type of people, but also a smaller group.
And could you just briefly describe the structure of Smart City Wien? So is it the city of Vienna that serves as the umbrella for all the different players in the field? And where does the MA18, where you're working, where are here right now, how does this come into play?
So yes, first of all, so I work in the Smart City Wien team, Smart City Vienna team, which is located here in the MA18. That's the department, Viennese department for city planning and city development. And I would say that every city, like the Smart City Wien team could be in different departments, but it's just that we are working really closely together with city development, so that's why it makes sense for the city of Vienna to have it here. But in other cities, it sometimes is in the innovation department or in the energy planning department and so on. So that's always different in every city. That's a little bit different. But what is important to us is that we try to coordinate, we try to initiate, we try to develop new ideas and develop the strategy further. But at the same time, we can never have the expertise for all these topics within the Smart City strategy. That's completely impossible. So we need a big network in the city of Vienna, and we have that network, and that's really great. That needs to function, and that all of these players need to really work together to be able to reach our targets. We also have a great network with other smart city representatives in Austria. So sometimes I also travel to other cities in Austria. Also in Europe, we have our networks in Europe as well, to also learn from the other cities in Europe, from the other cities in Austria, because very often we're facing similar challenges. I guess the same applies for the US. And so also this exchange is something really crucial.
And you also mentioned once that monitoring is a big part of your work, right? And you mentioned that the framework strategy was established, and that was probably a milestone for you and your team and for everyone in Vienna. And now it needs continuous monitoring, revising, adapting. So where are you right now in this process when it comes to monitoring?
So we had the first strategy that was adopted was in 2014, and we already evaluated and monitored that strategy. That was in 2017. We also have the report right here, and so that took place in 2017, and we really looked at, are we achieving our targets?
Yes.
Because these are long-term targets towards 2030, 2050. Of course, we cannot say in 17 whether we have reached them or not, but we can look at whether are we on track or are we not, and if we're not, we need to change something.
One example where we are right now on track in Vienna, and what will be one example where we are not entirely on track?
So I give you a very interesting example because it's also show how complex that is. For instance, we have seen that we are very much on track with the climate targets that we have set in 2014. Yes. That was great to see that we are on track with this. At the same time, while evaluating, we were not only looking at are we on track actually, we were also looking at the whole situation, the framework around us. And we realized actually we really need the climate policies is so dynamic, so we really actually need to also look at the European and Austrian context. And we saw also the Paris Agreement took place in the meantime. We also really realized, hey, we actually need to also set more ambitious targets. Mm-hmm. That was also something that we did consider, and then
so we were monitoring the first goals.
Exactly. And that was, I mean, there were many reasons, but this was also one of the reasons why we, at the end of the monitoring, our conclusion was we actually have to update our strategy a little bit in 2018, and then get the update from the city councils by 2019 to correct that a little bit. Also in the entire part of digitization, we really were also seeing a lot of progress that was happening. I think it is so interesting to see when you look back. The first strategy was established somewhere between 2012-13, so it was adopted then in 2014. And back then we actually talked about something like apps. An app was super new back then, or something that the city was really proud of if they developed apps. And so one of the targets was very interesting for me looking back now. It's like a little bit of a crazy target, but it was like the city was setting itself targets towards developing apps. And we now in 2019 and 18 we were like, no, we really need to have new targets for the digitization sector because everything has developed so fast within the last few years. And what was new and innovative back then is just not innovative and new right now. So that was a whole chapter that we were like rethinking a lot. Just to give you an example. So yeah,
things moving so fast makes monitoring definitely a challenging task for you, right?
Exactly.
Well, talking about challenges, we can move to our next topic, namely the topic of climate change. And you seem to be the right person to talk with about this. We have a little bit of a focus in our Vienna module of Smart Cities on climate change and also how to cool the city. And personally, I have noticed quite a few initiatives how to cool the city. Today is a pretty warm day of August while we're sitting here, and it seems like a good environment to raise these issues. Could you please start by describing the current climate situation in Vienna to us?
When we talk about climate change, we always need to talk about two things, and that's also what the city of Vienna is trying to tackle at the same time. One aspect is climate protection. That means really looking at our CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions and really trying to get them down. That's what we also agreed in the Paris Agreement, for instance, and that we really have to decrease our emissions towards climate neutrality. And in the city of Vienna, if we look at that, we have a lot of emissions coming from traffic, from heating and electricity that we use for our buildings. This can be different in other cities, but that's where the highest emissions come from in the city of Vienna. Also considering that's only one way to look at it, because a lot of things that we consume in the city of Vienna as citizens, as Viennese citizens, come from somewhere else. For instance, the food, especially for instance, eating meat causes a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. But they are not emitted right here in Vienna, but they are emitted because of our consumption here in Vienna. These are always two ways of looking at it. So let's take the traffic, let's take electricity, let's take heating, And then also looking at building material, food especially, and our daily consumption. These are like areas where we see a lot of potential of decreasing our emissions. And for these sectors, we really need to find solutions on how to go down with our emissions really fast and a lot. For instance, instead of going by car, you go by public transportation, you go by bike, or you walk. Just to give you a very, very brief introduction to that. Generally, having said that, I mean, the whole world emits CO2 and greenhouse gas emission. That's why we even have climate change. That's why climate change is happening. And that means that has to be done by our whole society. Nonetheless, climate change is already happening. We can see that everywhere. And that means the climatic conditions in Vienna are also changing. Which means, for instance, yes, it gets hotter every year. We will have a lot more heat waves every year. These consequences of climate change are also different in every city in Europe. Other cities will have to fight sea level rise, for instance. We're very lucky in Vienna, we don't have to fight sea level rise. Other cities in Europe, or probably also the US, will have shortages on drinking water. We are really fortunate as well here in the city of Vienna that drinking water is something we have a lot of, and of course we need to take care of it, but it's not the most pressing problem. That's really great for us. But
thanks to innovative thinkers years and years ago, right?
Exactly. We have an excellent system that takes the water from the mountains to the city of Vienna.
Which could already be described as one of the first smart city initiatives.
Yes. Sometimes we even take that example and say not everything that is clever and smart needs to be a new technology.
Yes.
Sometimes it's just it's something that we have always done and that we're good at, and that we maybe need to adapt a little bit, but that works already quite well. But going back to the challenges, so one of the challenges in Vienna that we're facing is more and more heat waves every year. So obviously we also need to really try to, for instance, to cool down the city. And one way of doing it is to introduce green and blue elements in the cities. That can be lakes, that can be trees, that can be green roofs or facades, green facades. That can be a good rainwater management, so the evaporation of the water can also cool down the city. And we're doing that in various projects in the city right now. But it's really important to prevent climate change from happening, to slow down climate change on the one side, and that means really reducing our CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time, since climate change is already happening, because there is already so much CO2 out in the atmosphere, we also need to think very, very intensely about how can we protect our society from the consequences. But it needs to happen both.
So protection and adaption.
Exactly.
At the same time.
Exactly. Yes.
And I can tell you that these initiatives that Eva mentioned are also very visible in Vienna. So, for example, in the street where I'm living right now, there were 6 trees planted and different little green areas. There are these evaporating fountains looking a bit like the lamps here, but it's not light that comes out of the fountains, but mist.
Exactly.
And it feels very nice actually to walk through these these elements. So quite a few things are going on here. Sorry.
Maybe that's also such a good example. How can we actually combine climate protection and adaptation at the same time? And I think the public space is a great way of showing how we can actually link those two things, because at the moment, a lot of parking cars, but also cars that are going on the road, are taking up 2/3 of the street, basically. And that's one way of thinking about a street. But how nice it could also be so nice to just take your little chair outside of your door and just sit in the middle of the street, in the middle of the public space, and maybe chill in front of a tree. That would be a great vision and a scenario for the future. Or we can have little playgrounds for all the children just in front of our house. And in that way, we rethink, and that's a lot what Smart City is about, like to rethink a little bit our ideas that we have right now and to create them into something better. In that way, we will lower emissions by cars that are currently run by fossil fuels, causing a lot of emissions. But at the same time, giving the people living in the city some greater asset, because it would be very great to plant your own food in front of your house, to let your children play in front of your house, to read a book in front of below a very nice cool tree in the summertime, and that means also with like cooling down the streets, adapting a little bit to the heat in summer. And this is a very nice way of adapting both. And additionally, you also think about social inclusion, and you think about societal aspects, social aspect as well, because very often it's the poor people living in Vienna that cannot just afford going on holiday every weekend. They really also need to have recreational space just in the city. Exactly. So thinking a little bit more complex is
I really like this idea of not taking things as a given, not taking it as a given that we have these streets filled and populated with cars. To give you a little context here, despite all these needs for further improvement, we are also sometimes complaining on a rather high level compared globally, of course. When we compare Vienna to most US American cities, we can see already a lot of bike lanes and reducing spaces for cars, but still a lot needs to be done. And currently there's also a debate going on about the inner district, of making the inner district car free. And there are some zones already. What was it? The shopping area, shopping street, Maria Hilferstrasse, right?
Yes.
I mean, the first time when politicians said, and when it was mentioned in public, that this street should be dedicated to cyclists and pedestrians, and there should be nice zones where people meet and interact, and cars should be banned. Only buses should drive through. Everyone was in shock, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it was impossible to envision these very large and prominent and important street connecting important places in Vienna to have this concept. And now I think most people would say that it was a very successful initiative and everyone enjoys it to walk there. But of course people have to give up something.
Yes. And this change is happening, and sometimes change creates more fear than joy for something new. And this is something that we
and this is also
feel a
about
lot.
Politics, right? And what also your jobs are. And it also brings us to our next topic, namely the topic of citizen participation. So citizen participation is one very important pillar of the whole Smart City Wien project, because you cannot do anything without citizens, and at least in a democracy, which we are lucky to have, you need citizens to agree on certain new projects. So could you give us some examples of successful citizen participation in your projects?
I think as you said, I think participation is something really important. It's also not only to get more acceptance by the citizens, but also I like to look at it that way, that we as city planners may have a certain background and expertise, that's for sure, but at the same time, the citizens living in a certain area of Vienna, they are the experts for the everyday life in that district and the everyday way of moving around, and they know exactly where things are going well and things are not going well. So I think it would be such a shame to not address them and also ask them for their sort of expertise on these like little things. And just to give you an example, we did that in a huge smart city project. Like let's say it was a refurbishment project in one of the districts in the Simmering in the south of Vienna. The project was called Smarter Together. That's already a really nice name of also including the whole social aspect and participatory element. And a few building blocks in that area were refurbished and renovated. The energy system was changed, but at the same time also people were looking at public space and mobility. And for the element of public space and mobility, there was quite a large questionnaire sent out to people, asking them exactly what parts of streets, what parts of the public space is working really well, and where do they feel fear, or where do they feel the need to have more space while walking or going with your kid and the trolley, for instance, or where's the need for elderly people to sit down sometimes. Like, this is exactly what the local people know the best. So it was very good that they were addressed, and they were addressed by sending out forms. But I think what was done also quite nicely is they created a mobile booth, let's call it like a mobile booth, and it was moving around all over the year, all over the summer, at different spots within that little district. And it was like an open space where people were able to come around. Sometimes it was like also a place to get together. I think eventually they also had offered some snacks or something, so where people were gathering, and they were trying to, like, city planning experts were mingling with people living there and trying to get out a little bit of this idea where what's working well, what's not working so well at the moment. I think
and I would assume that this is also a good example for social inclusion.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think it had this element of getting people together.
So we were talking a little bit about citizen participation and social inclusion. You were talking about the refurbishment project in Simmering. I have one more question for you when it comes to social inclusion. What are the biggest challenges here? What makes it hard to guarantee social inclusion?
I think the term social inclusion just when I hear it, so many different things are actually coming up. So let me just tackle a few things. So I think at the beginning I would like to say, okay, we have our own chapter within the Smart City framework strategy that only addresses social inclusion. I think when you look back, Vienna has always prioritized social inclusion really highly. It always, like, just looking at social housing, for instance, depending on how you want to calculate it, but every fourth citizen or more or less lives in a social housing building that is somehow funded by the city of Vienna. So this has this like really huge tradition of social housing, providing cheap rent for everybody, so that everybody can afford housing. Just to give you an example. A long tradition in having good public transportation, so people don't need to be able to afford a car to have a good quality of life in Vienna.
For example, a ticket for the excellent public transportation system in Vienna costs €365 a year, so €1 per day.
€1 per day, exactly. So that and this is an idea that also links with the Smart City framework strategy. So social inclusion, having people at the center of such an idea or such an initiative is highly important, and very often more prioritized and going in with new technologies that maybe even make huger gaps within society between rich and poor. Yeah. So then another thing is, I think climate change is often seen as something that is linked with nature and the environment, which is true. But for instance, I think, or if I do want to protect the climate, I think of protecting us as humans, not the climate. The climate can be hotter, warmer, whatever can change. That doesn't really matter. It's us that will be affected in the future. It's my generation that will be affected by it in the future, and it's something when we try to eat vegetarian, when we try to go by train instead of the car, if we try to limit our building materials, and if we go for renewable energy, it's because we want to have a good life in our future. It's about people, and climate change is causing one of the biggest humanitarian crises ever, because of people will have to immigrate to other countries. There will be like water shortages, food shortages, so a disaster for humans. So it is doing something for the climate, and protecting the climate means also putting social inclusion, social aspects at the very heart of every idea. Then when you really come down to hands-on things, like such as renovating a building, very very specific. You do that because you want to lower the energy consumption in that building. If you say that, if you communicate that to a normal citizen, very often it's not linked with all the ideas that I've just shared with you. It's very often just, oh, damn it, now I have to actually deal with that dust within the next few weeks and months. That sucks. I don't want to do this. Why do we actually need to change our energy system? It's not so easy to communicate that. Mm-hmm. And it's also a very, that's true, and that's you have to take that problem also that very seriously, and you have to really find ways of first communicating really well why you do that, but then also just to give you an example, once again with Smarter Together, what they did was also to ask people. There's already this change of the whole building will be renovated. Also to ask them whether they maybe actually have a very high energy bill, mm-hmm. Live in a really really big flat because they have been living there when they had kids and when they were living with a larger family. Now they maybe live there by themselves, pay a very high energy bill every month, and maybe they actually want to move to a smaller apartment because that's just what they want and need. Means a lower energy bill, and while renovating the house, it means also a lower energy demand. That means another it means once again saving a little bit of money on energy. And in that way, I was trying to now link a project, show you a project that makes sense for the climate, but it also makes sense for your income, for social aspects. But it also shows a little bit the barriers, because it is quite a challenge how to address people, mm-hmm. how to guide them in that process, mm-hmm. To create that acceptance as well. So
and to convince them, right? That the advantages outweigh the disadvantages.
Exactly.
For them, so. I see. Before we come to our last part, into the critical reflection of a smart mm-hmm. city term, mm-hmm. I would like to ask you now about another level of complexity added to smart city initiatives, namely cross-border initiatives and European initiatives. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, you were mentioning some other European cities, examples. So what would you say, what other European cities are your closest partners right now in your daily work, for example?
So I think the idea is very clear. We, all over Europe, probably all over the world, but since European cities have some similarity, mm-hmm. We all share similar challenges. We all also have a similar idea how cities function, how cities work, how the culture is.
How citizens can be convinced, right? It's all culturally rooted.
Exactly. Things like that. So we do share similar challenges, and we also want to find answers that work for all of us, or at least if one city already has a great idea about something, then we also want to learn from that city and to see if we can apply that for our own city. And for that purpose, we have quite a lot of city networks as well, official networks, but also a lot of contacts that we have, for instance, with smart city representatives in other cities. And that's great, because very often that means also, for instance, applying for a project that is sometimes EU funded. So the EU also sends out funds that cities can apply for to tackle, for instance, a certain mobility issue. And then you, for instance, Vienna, Amsterdam, and Madrid would apply as one project team for a certain funding. And in the best case, in the best way, we will work together over the next 2 years, exchanging idea about a certain mobility issue, and trying to develop solutions together. And I think this is a great way of exchanging knowledge. It's a great way of getting closer within Europe, and it's very great that the EU funds projects like this.
And so this is how they are setting incentives to actually foster collaboration.
Exactly.
At the beginning of our conversation, you were mentioning something that really resonated with me. You said that the term, the idea of smart city actually was able to bring departments together, bring disciplines together, and that it is not a given that all these departments now work together for one cause.
Exactly.
And as we believe, at least for a good and important cause. So this seems to be the great potential of the term smart city.
Yes.
However, of course, there's also critique and critical reflection, and especially the absence of a clear consensus of a smart city definition is very often criticized in literature. And typical voices of critique also address the high focus on the technological aspect. Digital control of the citizens is mentioned, a lack of true citizen participation, and so on. So there are all these points of critique. What do you think? What annoys you about this term?
So I think, yes, you're right. Smart city in an international context is very often linked with the idea of a digital city.
And not a social, sustainable, resilient city.
Exactly. And I'm very happy to work for a smart city team and a smart city strategy that it can be linked with social and sustainable city. And I think as long as it is linked with that, I do agree with most values and ideas and visions. If it is linked with digital city or technical city, I also have my doubts that this is sometimes the best way to go. The way we frame it, because I'm also not against digital aspects or technology,
they're good
not
tools
at all.
for the cause.
Exactly. We frame it. The way we do it is the headline goal also of the smart city strategy is to provide quality of life, the best quality of life for all citizens, always having the social inclusion aspect of it, while drastically minimizing our resource consumption, meaning, for instance, going down with our CO2 levels, trying to use less resources and so on. These are things that we really need to actually have a good life in the future. And since that is actually quite a challenge, we say, okay, we really need a lot of social and technological innovation. And we were very happy to really be able to write it down, to have to say, okay, we do not only need technological innovation, we also need social innovation, and we probably need a lot more innovation. We probably also need innovation on how we work as governments and how we govern cities, how our economic system works, how we actually address education and all these things. But let's stick with it first. Like, let's say, okay, we do need a lot of social and technological innovation. And maybe for some reasons and for some cases, a digital innovation can be great. Maybe, as you said about participation, maybe it opens the possibility for more people to participate and to vote for a certain project. On the other side, sometimes it can be not a question of technology. Just if you want to get people on bike instead of a car, for instance, not that much technology is involved in riding a bike, but it is more of a cultural innovation. Why do people, for instance, in Copenhagen, really like to ride their bike all the time, and how do we create a city that is really fun to ride a bike? And that's not really a technological question.
It's also a cultural question, right?
Exactly.
And a social and psychological question. And
Exactly.
that makes it so interesting. And this is where it all interlinks.
Exactly.
So my very last question for today would be, what is your advice for students in Illinois, but also all over the world, who are interested in smart city work, who listen to us right now and say, oh my God, this is my dream job. I wanna get involved. What do they need? What studies? What degrees? What skills? Soft skills? Hard skills? What would be your advice? How to prepare for a career in smart city issues?
I think first of all, I think wherever you are, you can do a little bit of research or contact people close by that work for a city and look up what the city is already doing. I'm pretty sure that wherever you live, in what country or city, your country or city will already do something about social and sustainable development. I'm pretty sure. So it could be very interesting to see how it already
what
works.
is going on in your community, right?
Exactly. Also to talk to your colleagues and friends. What do they think about when they hear the term smart city? What do they think about when they hear about social and ecological development? What do they do daily to actually get on board with this value? That's one thing. Then from an educational background, I think there are so many different studies that eventually could lead to working in a smart city department, so to say. As I said, I studied climate change, but we have also a lot of urban planners on board. Energy engineering will be needed to actually make that shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy. But it also could be super interesting to come from a psychological background to answer questions like how to change
communications too, right?
Yeah, communication or social studies. So there are very, very different disciplines and very different studies that you can follow, and the great work then is to actually be able to collaborate with others. And to also maybe to create, while you study, a little bit of an understanding of different disciplines and how they look at the world, how they look at city systems. Because if you look at a city from an environmental perspective, you will look at so many different things than when looking at it from a business perspective, for instance. It's like the urban planning perspective, political science aspect, they will all look at the city in such different ways. And there's so much potential when these people work together. And I think that's an advice that I would also give to you, to try to also understand people from very different disciplines and how they think and look at it.
So Eva, you could not have provided a better ending to today's interview than this, because the students out there who are hopefully watching are from different disciplines. That's and they are all in this online course together.
Great.
And hopefully also interacting with one another in these challenging times for interaction. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, students, for listening. And thanks, Eva, for taking the time to talking to us. We learned a lot, and I hope the students, I'm sure the students enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. We is Kyle and I, who cannot be seen because he's behind the camera. Thank you very much for setting the stage, Kyle.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for taking this opportunity to actually also to listen to what we do here in the city of Vienna. I think this is very great. I was happy to share some information, and I hope it was useful.
I'm sure, and I hope that very soon students from Illinois will again come to Vienna.
That would be great.
And maybe we can visit, or
Exactly.
you can visit us
Yes.
on the campus.
Yes, that would be great.
Thanks.
Thank you a lot. Thank you.